All right. So this is a story of Francis Popkin. In 1981, I got a knock on the door and opened the door, and there's this guy, 6'1", broad at the shoulders, narrow at the hips, classic, blue jeans, shirt kind of like this. And he says, I go, yes, could I help you? And young, 18. And he says, yeah, the people at the seminary told me I should stop in here. I said, oh, you know about Master Dodd? Yeah. And I said, well, come on in. He goes, and he was so incongruous with what you would think someone who would respond to the brilliance of the teaching would be. Very simple farm boy from Holyoke, Colorado, which is the middle of nowhere, true hayseed. And he tells me all this, and I go, so how did you come to find Master Da? He goes, well, when I graduated from high school last year, I was in mental pain all the time. And I talked to my father at my Catholic church, and he didn't help whatever he said. I read the Bible, and it didn't help. So I called Denver and found a bookstore. I looked in the yellow pages and found a spiritual bookstore, and I called him up and I said, what's the latest thing you got on truth?
That's what he said.
That's what he said. And they said, well, you'll just have to come and check it out for yourself. So I drove down to Denver, which was about 2 hours. I drove down to Denver and I looked at every book in the bookstore. And I picked out this one, The Enlightenment of the Whole Body. which was a tome of most sophisticated spiritual instructions in the history of the world at the time. And I said, this just didn't match. And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, I just opened it up and I just let my eyes go across all the words. And when I be doing that, my mental pain would go away. He said, and then I read the entire book cover to cover, and all the time I was reading it, my mental pain would go away. And I said, yeah, and, I'm trying to find out where he got all, what. And he goes, and then I thought, what if I understood what it said? And so I got myself a dictionary, and I put it right beside me, and I just read it. Every time I came to a word I didn't know, I looked it up. And I read the whole thing again, cover to cover.
I love it.
And I said, wow, I'm the only person I know that's read the whole thing cover to cover twice. He said, oh, then I read it again, cover to cover. And I thought, oh my God, he is returned. I said, let me just ask you one thing. Is this real? Is he who he says he is? And I said, oh, most certainly. He goes, have you told the Catholic Church yet? And I said, yeah, they're not interested again. And I kept like, Francis, what is there some part of this book that moves you? I'm trying to figure out what he latched onto that he got it, because I'm cognitively challenged and challenging and challenged too in some way. But and so he goes, no, just whatever. I said, but maybe there's something. I thought maybe some of the devotional, some of the simpler things. What will you do if you love me? Oh, friends, do not fail to mind me. I am the sweetness. Some of these things. And so I kept punching him. And he goes, oh, well, there is this one thing. I said, oh, tell me, show me. He opens it up to page 239, and he goes, truth, and he reads it to me. Truth is in the moment, this instant, in which there's no meaning, no cause, no motive to any effect. The radiance of ignorance is the reality. and all phenomena only test our realizations and sufficiency of that. It is neither subjective nor objective relative to this moment. It is the condition of all conditions. It is neither subjective nor object. It relative to this moment. It is unspeakable. And it is only. And he looked up and says, I don't know. Whenever I read that, something happens. And so I, kind of took him under wing and, tried to be his friend. It was in a period where Adi Da was teaching the community about dependency on his form, on his body form, so he really wasn't available. So Francis never got to see him. Mm-hmm. He hung around for several months. And I was always very disheartened that that was the timing of one of those periods. But I remember I said, you should write Master a letter. And he just went, I could write him a letter. I said, yeah, he receives cards of appreciation when people love his teaching like you do and respond to his presence. So he went out and he came back and handed me a card. And it was a Hallmark card. And on the front, it was a bull snorting. And you open it up and says, I get a charge out of you. And there are many stories like this with Francis Popkin. I've tried to find them even on the internet of late. And and so then, as you know, the next year I was in Adi Da's personal intimate company. And Andrew Johnson had come over, another Southerner, another country boy like me. And so I was telling him the Francis Popkin stories, and we were just, and everybody would just laugh. He goes, you got to tell the master. So that night we're in the gathering, and Andrew says, Frank, master has this incredible story. And so, I tell, I tell these stories, and I just want to get, what's the latest thing you got on truth? And we're all like, roar, and I get a charge out of you, and all these naive reflection. But Master never wasn't laughing. It was very quickly, because I told him many stories that are like this, and the naivete to us was humorous. The hayseed. Master was not. He just sat there, and it was really obvious, really quickly, that our laughing was really an insensitivity, and that the Master just sat there and listened to story after story of him for an hour. And just sat there, and then and he was just in bliss, hearing these stories. And then at the end of it, he said, "Well, that just proves it. You don't need to be a sophisticate to understand this teaching. You just need to need it." And so I always that. Always really impressed me. That you don't need to have a PhD. You don't have to have comparative religion. All those things will completely enlarge your appreciation of the teaching because it's so perfect and so complete. But and although it seems very difficult and like the quote I just read, I memorized it because Francis read it. I went, ooh, I'm going to memorize that one. And you don't. It seems like you would have to have a PhD in philosophy to understand that. Right. And it was just like Master said, no, you don't need that. You just need to need the teaching. That's what's required. So that was my lesson. All of our humorous thing, but he gave it back to us. Mm-hmm. Oh, you're right. We just need to need it.